The blood on Beatrice Morrison's dress had dried to a dark rust color by the time she stumbled into Oatman, Arizona territory, in the scorching summer of 1884, her brother's rage still echoing in her ears like thunder that refused to fade. She had run through the night, her feet blistered and bleeding inside boots that were never meant for such desperate flight. The sun was climbing higher now, turning the dusty street into a shimmering mirage of heat and exhaustion. Beatrice's dark hair had come loose from its pins, cascading down her back in tangled waves, and her green eyes darted from building to building, searching for sanctuary, or at least a moment's rest where her brother could not find her. Oatman was a mining town, rough and ready, with wooden buildings that seemed to lean against each other for support. The main street was wide and dusty, lined with a saloon, a general store, a boarding house, and various other establishments that served the miners who worked the nearby claims. Beatrice had never been to such a place before. Her life had been confined to the ranch where her brother Tobias ruled with an iron fist and a quick temper. She pressed herself against the wall of the general store, trying to catch her breath and slow her racing heart. The blood on her dress was not her own, though she bore plenty of bruises beneath the fabric. It belonged to Clara, the young woman Tobias had brought to the ranch as a housekeeper, the woman who had shown Beatrice the first real kindness she had known in years. Clara, who had paid for that kindness with her life when she tried to help Beatrice escape. The memory made Beatrice's stomach turn, and she closed her eyes against the tears that threatened to fall. She could not afford tears now. She could not afford weakness. Tobias would come looking for her. He always did. Ever since their parents died 5 years ago, leaving Tobias in charge of everything, including her, he had made it clear that she was his property, to do with as he pleased. "Miss, are you all right?" The voice startled her, and Beatrice's eyes flew open to find a man standing a respectful distance away. He was tall, with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of long days under the Arizona sun. His dark hair fell just past his collar, and his brown eyes held genuine concern. He wore the clothes of a working cowboy, worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest. A hat hung down his back on a cord around his neck, and a bandana was tied loosely at his throat. "I am fine," Beatrice said, her voice hoarse from thirst and fear. "Thank you for your concern." The man's eyes traveled over her appearance, taking in the stained dress, the disheveled hair, the way she held herself as if ready to run at any moment. "You do not look fine, if you will pardon me saying so. When did you last have water?" Beatrice opened her mouth to insist again that she was well, but her body betrayed her. The world tilted sideways and she felt herself falling. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground, and then everything went dark. When consciousness returned, Beatrice found herself lying on a narrow bed in a small, clean room. Sunlight streamed through a window, and she could hear voices murmuring nearby. Panic seized her immediately, and she tried to sit up, but gentle hands pressed her back down. "Easy now," a woman's voice said. "You are safe here. My name is Martha, and this is my boarding house. Preston Foster brought you here after you fainted on the street." Beatrice focused on the woman's face. Martha was perhaps 50, with kind gray eyes and silver-streaked brown hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a simple calico dress and an apron, and her hands were work-worn but gentle. "I need to leave," Beatrice said, struggling again to rise. "He will find me. He will come for me." "Who will find you?" Martha asked, her voice calm but firm as she kept Beatrice on the bed. "Who are you running from?" Before Beatrice could answer, there was a knock at the door, and the man from the street entered at Martha's invitation. Preston Foster, Martha had called him. He carried a tray with a pitcher of water, a glass, and what looked like bread and cheese. "How is she?" Preston asked, setting the tray on a small table beside the bed. "Frightened half to death," Martha said bluntly, "and running from someone. I think we ought to hear her story before we do anything else." Preston pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, his movements slow and unthreatening. "My name is Preston Foster. I work at the Fairweather Ranch about 5 miles outside town. Martha here runs the best boarding house in Oatman, and I promise you, we mean you no harm. But Martha is right. We need to know what you are running from if we are going to help you." Beatrice looked between them, searching their faces for any sign of deception or cruelty. She had learned to recognize such things in her brother's expression. But these two looked at her with nothing but concern and patience. Still, trusting anyone felt like stepping off a cliff into darkness. "My name is Beatrice Morrison," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am from a ranch about 30 miles north of here. My brother, Tobias Morrison, he owns it. Our parents died 5 years ago, and since then Tobias has been—" She faltered, unsure how to put into words the nightmare her life had become. "Has he hurt you?" Preston asked quietly. Beatrice nodded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "He hurts everyone. He killed Clara yesterday. She was trying to help me escape, and he shot her. I ran while he was distracted, and I have been running ever since." Martha's face went pale and Preston's jaw tightened. "He killed someone?" Martha asked. "Are you certain?" "I saw it happen," Beatrice whispered. "I saw the light go out of her eyes." Preston stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street below. "Morrison Ranch," he said thoughtfully. "I have heard of it. People say Tobias Morrison is a hard man, but I did not know he was a murderer." "No one knows," Beatrice said. "He is careful. He makes things look like accidents, or he buries the evidence where no one will find it. Clara is not the first person he has killed." There was a ranch hand who asked too many questions about the books. There was a traveling preacher who spoke out against Tobias at Sunday service. They all disappeared, and no one ever found them. Martha sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, her hand finding Beatrice's and squeezing gently. "You poor child. How old are you?" 22, Beatrice said. "I have been trying to leave for years, but he watches me constantly. He says I belong to him, that I am his responsibility until he decides to marry me off to whoever will pay the best price." Preston turned from the window, his expression dark with anger. "He cannot own you. This is not the Dark Ages." "Try telling him that," Beatrice said bitterly. "He has the law in his pocket. The sheriff in our county is his friend. They drink together, play cards together. Who do you think the law would believe, him or me?" The room fell silent as the weight of Beatrice's situation settled over them. Finally, Preston spoke. "You need to stay here out of sight until we can figure out what to do. Martha, can you keep her hidden if Morrison comes looking?" "I have a room in the cellar," Martha said. "It was meant for storage, but I can make it comfortable enough. No one would think to look there." "Good," Preston said. "I will talk to the ranch owner, Mr. Fairweather. He is a good man and he has connections. Maybe he can help." Beatrice felt a flicker of hope, fragile and tentative. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You do not know me." Preston met her eyes, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because no one should have to live in fear the way you have been living." Over the next few days, Beatrice remained hidden in Martha's cellar room. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single lamp for light. Martha brought her meals and clean clothes, refusing to take any payment despite Beatrice's insistence that she would find a way to repay the kindness. Preston came to visit each evening after his work at the ranch was done. At first, his visits were brief. just checking to make sure Beatrice was all right and reporting on his conversations with Mr. Fairweather. But gradually, the visits grew longer, and they began to talk about more than just her situation. Beatrice learned that Preston was 26 years old and had been working at the Fairweather Ranch for 3 years. Before that, he had drifted from place to place, working cattle drives and odd jobs, never really settling anywhere. His parents had died when he was young, and he had grown up in an orphanage in Kansas before striking out on his own at 16. "I never had much family," Preston told her one evening as they sat in the small room, the lamp casting warm shadows on the walls. "The orphanage was not a bad place, but it was not home either. I always figured I would just keep drifting until I found somewhere that felt right." "And the Fairweather Ranch feels right?" Beatrice asked. Preston considered the question. "It is starting to," he said. "Mr. Fairweather treats his workers well, and the land is beautiful. There is something about watching the sun set over the desert that makes you feel like you are part of something bigger than yourself." Beatrice smiled, the first real smile she had managed since arriving in Oatman. "I would like to see that someday." "You will," Preston promised. "Once we know it is safe, I will take you out there myself." But safety remained elusive. On the 4th day of Beatrice's hiding, Tobias Morrison rode into Oatman with 3 of his ranch hands. Beatrice heard the commotion from her cellar room and felt her blood run cold. Martha came down the stairs quickly, her face tight with worry. "Your brother is here," Martha said quietly. "He is asking around town about you, showing people a description. He is saying you are mentally unwell, that you ran away in a fit of madness, and he is worried about your safety." Beatrice felt sick. People will believe him. He is charming when he wants to be. He will convince them that he is the concerned brother and I am the unstable sister. "Preston is dealing with him," Martha said. "He went out to talk to him before Morrison could start asking questions here." Upstairs, Preston stood in the street, facing Tobias Morrison with a carefully neutral expression. Morrison was a big man, thick through the shoulders and chest, with cold blue eyes and a smile that never reached them. He sat astride a large bay horse, looking down at Preston with the air of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "I am looking for my sister," Morrison said, his voice carrying across the street. "Beatrice Morrison. She is 22 years old, dark hair, green eyes, about 5 feet and 4 inches tall. She is not well in the head, and I am very concerned for her safety." "Have not seen anyone matching that description," Preston said evenly, "but I will keep an eye out." Morrison's eyes narrowed slightly. "You are certain? She might have been confused, disoriented. She might not have given her real name." "Like I said, I have not seen her," Preston repeated. "Might want to try the next town over. Lots of folks pass through here on their way somewhere else." Morrison stared at Preston for a long moment, and Preston could feel the threat radiating off the man like heat from a fire. But he held his ground, keeping his expression blank and his body relaxed. Finally, Morrison nodded slowly. "I will be checking the other towns," Morrison said, "but I will be back this way. If you do happen to see my sister, you let her know that I am very worried about her, that I just want her to come home safe." "Sure thing," Preston said. Morrison and his men rode out of town, but Preston knew it was not over. Men like Morrison did not give up easily, especially when their pride and control were at stake. He waited until they were out of sight before heading back to Martha's boarding house. In the cellar, Beatrice sat on the bed, her whole body trembling. Preston sat down beside her, careful to leave space between them, respecting her need for distance even as he wanted to offer comfort. "He will be back," Beatrice said. "He will keep looking until he finds me." "Then we need to make sure he cannot find you," Preston said. "Mr. Fairweather has offered to let you stay at the ranch. It is far enough from town that Morrison would not think to look there, and we have enough people around that you would be safe." Beatrice looked at him, hope and fear warring in her eyes. "Why would Mr. Fairweather do that for me? He does not even know me." "I told him your story," Preston said. "He has a daughter of his own, and the thought of anyone treating a woman the way your brother has treated you made him angry enough to want to help. He is a good man, Beatrice. You can trust him." Over the next week, plans were made to move Beatrice to the Fairweather Ranch. It had to be done carefully, under cover of darkness, and Preston enlisted the help of several trusted ranch hands to make sure the journey would be safe. Beatrice found herself both grateful and overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers who owed her nothing, but gave her everything. The night they moved her to the ranch, Preston drove a wagon with Beatrice hidden under a tarp in the back. It was uncomfortable and hot, but Beatrice did not complain. When they finally arrived at the ranch and Preston helped her down from the wagon, she got her first look at what would be her new home. The Fairweather Ranch was larger than she had expected, with a sprawling main house, several barns, and a bunkhouse for the workers. The land stretched out in all directions, rolling hills covered in scrub brush and dotted with cattle. In the distance, mountains rose against the star-filled sky, their peaks dark against the lighter darkness of the night. "It is beautiful," Beatrice breathed. "Wait until you see it in the daylight," Preston said, smiling. Mr. Fairweather came out to meet them, and Beatrice was struck immediately by his kindness. He was in his 50s, with graying hair and a weathered face that spoke of years working the land. His wife had passed away several years earlier, Preston had told her, and his daughter lived back east with her husband. The ranch was his life now, and he ran it with fairness and integrity. "Miss Morrison," Mr. Fairweather said, extending his hand. "Welcome to the Fairweather Ranch. Preston has told me about your situation, and I want you to know that you are safe here for as long as you need." Beatrice shook his hand, fighting back tears at the simple decency of the gesture. "Thank you, sir. I do not know how I will ever repay your kindness." "No repayment necessary," Mr. Fairweather said. "But if you want to earn your keep, I could use help with the bookkeeping and correspondence. My eyes are not what they used to be, and I have been falling behind on the paperwork." Beatrice felt a surge of relief. She could do that. Her father had taught her to read and write and cipher before he died, and she had always been good with numbers. "I would be happy to help," she said. Mr. Fairweather set her up in a small cabin that had once been used for a foreman. It was cozy and private, with a fireplace, a bed, a table and chairs, and even a small bookshelf filled with worn volumes. Preston helped her carry in supplies and get a fire going in the fireplace, even though the summer night was warm. "You will be safe here," Preston said as he prepared to leave. "The cabin is close enough to the main house that someone will hear if you call for help, but far enough away that you have privacy. I will come by tomorrow to show you around the ranch." Beatrice walked him to the door, and on impulse, she reached out and touched his arm. "Preston, I want you to know how grateful I am. You saved my life." Preston looked down at her hand on his arm, and when his eyes met hers, Beatrice felt something shift between them. It was like the air before a storm, charged and electric. "I am glad I was there," Preston said softly. "I am glad I could help." After he left, Beatrice lay in the narrow bed, staring up at the ceiling beams and marveling at how much her life had changed in such a short time. For the first time in 5 years, she felt safe. For the first time in her life, she felt like she might have found people who cared about her not because they had to, but because they chose to. The following weeks settled into a routine that felt almost dreamlike in its normalcy. Beatrice spent her mornings helping Mr. Fairweather with the ranch accounts, and she discovered She had a knack for organizing the paperwork that had piled up over the months. In the afternoons, she helped around the ranch house, cooking and cleaning alongside Maria, the older Mexican woman who served as the ranch's cook and housekeeper. Maria was warm and motherly, and she took Beatrice under her wing immediately, teaching her new recipes and sharing stories about her own large family that lived in a nearby town. Beatrice found herself relaxing in Maria's presence, letting down some of the walls she had built around herself during the years with Tobias. But it was the evenings she looked forward to most, because that was when Preston would finish his work and come by the cabin. Sometimes he brought fresh eggs from the chicken coop or vegetables from Maria's garden. Sometimes he came with books he thought Beatrice might enjoy from the small library in the bunkhouse. And sometimes he came with nothing but his company and conversation. They talked about everything and nothing. Preston told her about the horses he was training, about the challenges of ranch work, about his dreams of someday having a small spread of his own. Beatrice told him about her childhood before her parents died, about the books she loved to read, about her dream of someday seeing the ocean even though she had no idea if that would ever be possible. Why the ocean? Preston asked one evening as they sat on the porch of her cabin, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I read about it in a book once," Beatrice said. "The author described it as endless and powerful and beautiful. I think about something that vast and ancient, and it makes me feel like my problems are smaller somehow." "Does that make sense?" "It does," Preston said. "I felt that way the first time I saw the Grand Canyon. Made me realize how small I was in the grand scheme of things, but also how lucky I was to be alive to see it." Beatrice turned to look at him, studying his profile in the fading light. Preston Foster was a good man, she had realized. Not just kind, but genuinely good in a way that seemed rare in the world. He never pushed her to talk about things she was not ready to discuss. He never touched her without permission. He treated her like a person with her own thoughts and feelings and worth, not like property or a burden. And somewhere along the way, without quite meaning to, Beatrice had started falling in love with him. The realization came one morning as she was working on the account books in Mr. Fairweather's office. She had been thinking about Preston, as she often did, remembering something funny he had said the night before. And suddenly, her heart felt too big for her chest, and she knew. The knowledge terrified her. Love meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant the possibility of being hurt. She had sworn to herself that she would never let anyone have that kind of power over her again. But Preston already had it, she realized. He had had it from the moment he caught her as she fainted in the street, maybe even from the moment his brown eyes had looked at her with genuine concern. Preston was having his own revelations. He had always been a solitary person, content with his own company and the company of horses. But Beatrice had changed something in him. He found himself looking for excuses to see her, to hear her voice, to make her smile. When he was working, part of his mind was always thinking about her, wondering what she was doing, hoping she was happy. He had never been in love before. There had been girls here and there over the years, brief connections that never went anywhere, but this was different. Beatrice was different. She was strong and brave and kind, despite everything she had been through. She was smart and funny and beautiful, with a smile that could light up the darkest night, but Preston was also aware of the complications. Beatrice was running from a dangerous man, and she was still healing from years of abuse. The last thing she needed was someone pushing her into something she was not ready for. So Preston kept his feelings to himself and tried to be content with friendship. Summer turned to autumn, and the desert began to cool. The mesquite trees turned golden, and the evenings grew long and pleasant. Beatrice had been at the ranch for nearly 3 months, and she had not heard anything about Tobias during that time. Part of her wanted to believe that he had given up, that he had moved on and forgotten about her. But a deeper, wiser part of her knew better. Tobias never forgot, and he never forgave. One afternoon in late October, Beatrice was helping Maria prepare dinner when Preston came running into the ranch house, his face tight with worry. Mr. Fairweather was right behind him. "Tobias Morrison is in town," Preston said without preamble. One of the hands saw him and his men at the saloon, asking questions again. "He is still looking for you." Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. "After all this time?" "Men like him do not give up," Mr. Fairweather said grimly. "We need to decide what to do. You can stay hidden here, but if he decides to search the surrounding ranches, we might not be able to keep you concealed." "I will not put you all in danger," Beatrice said, though her voice shook. "Maybe I should leave, head further west or south. If I keep moving, he cannot catch me." "No," Preston said sharply. "Running is not the answer. You will be vulnerable on your own, and he has the resources to chase you across the territory if he wants to." "Then what do you suggest?" Beatrice asked, frustration and fear making her voice sharp. Preston looked at Mr. Fairweather, then back at Beatrice. "We could go to the territorial marshal in Prescott, tell him what Morrison has done, get the law involved properly." "And you think the marshal will believe me over Tobias?" Beatrice said bitterly. "He has money and influence." "I have nothing but my word." "You have more than that," Mr. Fairweather said. "You have witnesses to your condition when you arrived in Oatman. You have Martha and Preston and myself, all willing to testify about what you told us. And if Morrison killed that woman, Clara, there might be evidence at his ranch." Beatrice wanted to believe him, but years of learning that the law did not work for people like her made it hard to hope. Still, what choice did she have? She could not run forever. "All right," she said finally. "We will try the marshal." They decided that Preston would take Beatrice to Prescott while Mr. Fairweather stayed at the ranch to deal with Morrison if he showed up asking questions. They would leave before dawn the next morning, taking back roads to avoid being seen. That night, Preston came to Beatrice's cabin to go over the plan. They were both tense, the easy comfort of their friendship strained by the worry of what lay ahead. Beatrice made coffee and they sat at her small table, a map spread out between them. "It is about a 2-day ride to Prescott," Preston said, tracing the route with his finger. "We will take supplies and camp along the way. I know places where we can stop that are off the main roads." "Preston," Beatrice said, setting down her coffee cup. "If something happens, if Morrison finds us, you need to promise me you will not try to be a hero. You need to save yourself." Preston looked up at her, his brown eyes intense in the lamplight. "That is not going to happen. You do not know that. Tobias is dangerous. He has killed people for less than helping me escape. I could not bear it if something happened to you because of me." Preston reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time he had initiated such contact, and Beatrice felt her breath catch at the warmth of his calloused palm against hers. "Nothing is going to happen to either of us," Preston said firmly. "I am not going to let Morrison hurt you ever again. I promise you that." Beatrice looked down at their joined hands, feeling the sting of tears in her eyes. "Why do you care so much?" she whispered. "Why have you gone to so much trouble for me?" Preston was silent for a long moment, and when Beatrice looked up, she found him watching her with an expression that made her heart race. "I think you know why," he said softly. The air between them felt charged, heavy with things unsaid. Beatrice wanted to be brave, wanted to close the distance between them and tell him that she felt the same way. But fear held her back, fear of loss, fear of vulnerability, fear of everything that love represented. "I care about you too," she managed finally. "More than I should, probably." "Why should you not?" Preston asked, his thumb brushing gently across her knuckles. "Because I am still afraid," Beatrice admitted. "Because Tobias is still out there, and until he is dealt with, I cannot think about anything else. Because you deserve better than someone as broken as I am." Preston stood and came around the table, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level. "You are not broken," he said fiercely. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met. You survived things that would have destroyed other people, and you came through it with your kindness and your spirit intact. Do not let him take that from you too." A tear slipped down Beatrice's cheek, and Preston reached up to brush it away. The gentleness of the gesture undid something in her, and suddenly she was crying in earnest, months of fear and pain and loneliness pouring out of her. Preston pulled her into his arms, holding her as she wept against his shoulder, murmuring soft words of comfort. When the tears finally subsided, Beatrice pulled back, embarrassed by her loss of control. "I am sorry," she said, wiping at her eyes. "Do not be," Preston said. "You have earned the right to cry. You have earned the right to feel everything you are feeling." Beatrice managed a watery smile. "You are a good man, Preston Foster." "I am a man in love with you," Preston said simply. "And I wanted you to know that before we leave tomorrow, just in case. I am not asking you for anything. I am not expecting anything. I just wanted you to know." Beatrice's heart felt like it might burst. Here was this man, this wonderful, kind, brave man, offering her his heart with no strings attached, and she wanted so badly to take it, to give him hers in return. But the shadow of Tobias still loomed too large. "When this is over," she said, taking Preston's face in her hands. "When Tobias cannot hurt me anymore, when I am truly free, ask me again, and I will give you an answer you will like." Preston smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "That is all I needed to hear," he said. They left before dawn as planned, riding 2 horses and leading a pack mule loaded with supplies. The October morning was cool and crisp, and as the sun rose, it painted the desert in shades of gold and amber. Under different circumstances, Beatrice thought, the journey might have been beautiful. As it was, every sound made her jump, every distant rider made her heart race. But Preston was calm and steady beside her, and his presence helped ease her fear. They rode in comfortable silence for the most part, saving their energy for the long miles ahead. When they did talk, it was about small things, safe things, anything to keep the worry at bay. They made camp that first night in a small canyon where a creek provided water and the rock walls would hide their fire. Preston set up their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, respecting the boundaries between them even as Beatrice found herself wishing they were closer. After a simple dinner of beans and hardtack, they sat by the fire, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The desert at night was a symphony of small sounds. The chirp of insects, the distant howl of coyotes, the whisper of wind through sage. "You ever think about what you would do if you could do anything?" Beatrice asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "If you had no limits, no responsibilities, what would you choose?" Preston considered the question. "I think I would want exactly what I am working toward now. A small ranch, good horses, a simple life, maybe a family someday if I am lucky." "That does not sound very ambitious," Beatrice said with a small smile. "Maybe not," Preston agreed. "But I grew up with nothing, so the idea of having a place that is mine, that no one can take away, that feels like more than enough. What about you? What would you do?" Beatrice stared into the fire, thinking. "I would want to help people," she said slowly. "Women like me, who are trapped and do not see a way out. I would want to create a place where they could go to be safe, to learn skills, to start over. Is that foolish? Not foolish at all, Preston said. The world needs more people who want to help others. Maybe when this is all over I can find a way to do that, Beatrice said. If I make it through this. When you make it through this, Preston corrected firmly. Not if. When. On the second day of riding, they were within a few hours of Prescott when Preston suddenly pulled his horse to a stop, his hand raised in warning. Beatrice halted beside him, following his gaze to the horizon. Riders, Preston said quietly. 3 of them coming this way. Beatrice felt her stomach drop. Tobias, cannot tell from this distance, Preston said, but we should not take chances. There is an old miner's cabin about a mile east of here, up in the rocks. We can hide there until they pass. They urged their horses into a faster pace, making for the rocky outcropping Preston had indicated. Beatrice kept glancing over her shoulder, watching the distant riders grow closer. Her heart hammered in her chest, and she gripped the reins so tightly her hands ached. The cabin was little more than a tumble-down shack, its roof half caved in and its walls weathered to gray. But it provided cover, and they quickly led the horses behind it, hoping the animals would not be visible from the road. Preston pulled out his rifle and positioned himself where he could watch the approaching riders through a gap in the cabin's wall. Beatrice crouched beside him, trying to control her breathing, trying not to imagine what would happen if Tobias found them here. As the riders drew closer, Preston relaxed slightly. It is not Morrison, he said. Just 3 cowboys, probably heading to Prescott like we are. Beatrice felt the tension drain out of her, leaving her weak and shaky. How much longer until we reach town? She asked. A few more hours, Preston said. We will wait until those riders are well past, then head out again. They reached Prescott just as the sun was setting, painting the town in warm, golden light. Prescott was the territorial capital and much larger than Oatman, with proper streets, brick buildings, and a sense of permanence that Oatman lacked. Preston led them directly to the marshal's office, a solid building near the center of town. Marshal William Green was a man in his 50s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He listened to Beatrice's story with a neutral expression, occasionally asking questions but mostly just letting her talk. When she finished, there was a long silence. Finally, Marshal Green leaned back in his chair and said, "That is a serious accusation, Miss Morrison. Murder is not something I take lightly." "I am not asking you to take it lightly," Beatrice said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I am asking you to investigate. Go to the ranch, look for evidence. Talk to the ranch hands. Someone there must know something. Your brother has friends in high places," the marshal said. "I have met him a few times at territorial functions. He has always seemed like an upstanding man." "That is what he wants people to think," Beatrice said, frustration creeping into her voice. "But I am telling you the truth. He killed Clara, he has killed others, and he will keep killing unless someone stops him." The marshal looked at Preston. "And you believe her?" "I do," Preston said without hesitation. "I have seen the fear in her eyes. I have seen the bruises. And I know enough about men like Morrison to know that Miss Morrison is telling the truth." Marshal Green was silent for another long moment, then nodded. "All right. I will send a deputy to the Morrison ranch to investigate. But I need you to understand, Miss Morrison, that if we do not find evidence to support your claims, there is not much I can do. Your brother could potentially file charges against you for defamation." "I understand," Beatrice said. "But please, you have to try." The marshal agreed to send someone out to the ranch within the next few days, and he arranged for Beatrice and Preston to stay at a respectable hotel in town while they waited for news. The hotel was nicer than anywhere Beatrice had stayed in her life, with clean sheets and hot water and a restaurant downstairs that served food she had only dreamed about. But she could not enjoy any of it. She was too worried, too tense, too aware that everything depended on what the marshal's deputy found at the ranch. Preston stayed in the room next to hers, and that night, unable to sleep, Beatrice knocked softly on his door. He answered immediately, fully dressed, as if he too had been unable to rest. "I cannot stop thinking about what happens if they do not find anything," Beatrice said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if there is no evidence? What if Tobias has covered his tracks too well?" Preston ushered her into his room and closed the door. "Then we will figure something else out, but let us not worry about that until we know for certain." "How can you be so calm?" Beatrice asked. "How can you not be terrified?" "Who says I am not terrified?" Preston said with a slight smile. "I just do not see the point in borrowing trouble before it arrives." Beatrice paced the small room, her mind racing. "I should never have involved you in this. I should never have let you come with me. If something happens, if Tobias finds out you helped me, he will come after you too." Preston caught her by the shoulders, gently but firmly stopping her frantic pacing. "Beatrice, look at me." She looked up at him, seeing the determination in his brown eyes. "I made my choice," Preston said. "I chose to help you, and I would make the same choice again. I am not afraid of your brother, and I am not going to let him hurt you. Do you understand?" Beatrice felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "I do not deserve you." "You deserve everything good in the world," Preston said softly. "And I am going to do everything in my power to make sure you get it." Before she could think better of it, Beatrice rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was brief and chaste, just a gentle pressure of lips against lips, but it sent warmth flooding through her entire body. When she pulled back, Preston was looking at her with wonder and tenderness. "That was not very proper of me," Beatrice said, feeling her cheeks flush. "I am not complaining," Preston said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I want you to be sure. I do not want you to do anything you are not ready for." "I am sure," Beatrice said. "I am sure that I care about you. I am sure that I want this, whatever this becomes. I am just also sure that I am terrified and overwhelmed and not entirely certain what I am doing." Preston smiled and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "We will figure it out together," he murmured into her hair. "One step at a time." They stood like that for a long time, drawing comfort from each other's presence. Eventually, Preston walked Beatrice back to her own room, kissing her forehead before saying goodnight. Beatrice lay in bed, her lips still tingling from that brief kiss, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt something like happiness. 3 days passed before Marshal Green sent word that he wanted to see them. 3 days of waiting and worrying and trying to stay occupied in a town where they knew no one. Preston took Beatrice to see some of the sights, trying to distract her from her anxiety. They visited the courthouse, walked through the mercantile, and spent an afternoon at a small museum that showcased the territory's history. But when the marshal's summons finally came, Beatrice felt her stomach twist into knots. She and Preston walked to the marshal's office together, Preston's hand a steady presence at the small of her back. Marshal Green looked grim as they entered. "Please, sit down," he said, gesturing to the chairs across from his desk. Beatrice sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Preston sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "My deputy returned from the Morrison ranch yesterday," the marshal began. "He spoke with several of the ranch hands and searched the property." "And?" Beatrice asked when the marshal paused. "And he found evidence of a freshly dug grave in the area you indicated. When we exhumed it, we found the body of a woman matching the description you gave of Clara. She had been shot, just as you said. Beatrice felt a wave of relief so strong it made her dizzy. "So you believe me?" "I do," the marshal said. "And there is more. Several of the ranch hands were willing to talk once they realized we were serious about investigating. One of them, a young man named Miguel Santos, confirmed that he saw your brother shoot Clara. He was too afraid to come forward before, but he is willing to testify now." "So what happens next?" Preston asked. "I am going to issue a warrant for Tobias Morrison's arrest on charges of murder," the marshal said. "I have already wired the sheriff in Morrison's county and informed him of the situation. Deputies are on their way to the ranch now to bring him in." Beatrice could hardly believe what she was hearing. After years of feeling powerless, after months of running and hiding, justice was finally within reach. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much. You showed a lot of courage coming here," the marshal said. "A lot of women in your situation would not have had the strength to speak up." "I had help," Beatrice said, glancing at Preston. "I could not have done this alone. It took 2 more weeks for everything to be resolved. Tobias was arrested and brought to Prescott to face trial. The trial itself was swift, with Miguel's testimony and the physical evidence of Clara's body providing more than enough proof of Tobias's guilt. He was found guilty of murder and sentenced to hang. Throughout the trial, Beatrice sat in the courtroom, Preston beside her, and watched her brother's empire crumble. Tobias tried to maintain his composure at first, tried to play the role of the wrong gentleman. But as the evidence mounted, as witness after witness came forward to testify about his cruelty and violence, his mask began to slip. When the judge read the verdict, Tobias's eyes found Beatrice in the courtroom. The look he gave her was full of rage and hatred, but for the first time, Beatrice did not flinch. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to be cowed by him any longer. After the trial, Marshal Green informed Beatrice that as Tobias's only living relative, she was entitled to inherit the Morrison ranch. The news shocked her. She had not thought about the ranch, had not considered what would happen to it once Tobias was convicted. "I do not want it," she told the marshal. "I do not want anything that belonged to him." "You should think about it before you make that decision," Preston said gently. "The ranch is valuable. You could sell it, use the money to start over however you want." Beatrice considered his words. He was right, she realized. The ranch represented a way out, a way to build the life she had always dreamed of. Not for herself alone, but for others like her. In the end, she decided to sell the ranch but keep a portion of the proceeds to establish exactly what she had talked about with Preston that night by the campfire. A place where women fleeing dangerous situations could come for help. She would call it Clara's house, in memory of the woman whose death had ultimately led to Beatrice's freedom. With the trial behind them and Beatrice's future secured, they returned to Oatman. The town greeted them with warmth and celebration, having heard about the trial's outcome. Martha hugged Beatrice tightly, tears streaming down her face, and Mr. Fairweather offered his congratulations. But more importantly, Beatrice and Preston finally had the chance to talk about their own future. They sat on the porch of her cabin at the Fairweather Ranch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. It was November now, and the desert had cooled considerably, though the days were still pleasant. "So," Preston said, taking Beatrice's hand in his, "I believe you told me to ask you again when this was all over." Beatrice smiled, her heart full. "I did say that, did I not, Beatrice Morrison?" Preston said, turning to face her fully. "I love you. I think I have loved you since the moment I caught you as you fainted in the street, though it took me a while to realize it. I know we have not known each other long, and I know you have been through things that would break most people. but I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you will have me. Will you marry me?" Beatrice felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." Preston let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around until they were both laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her properly, deeply, pouring all his love and devotion into that kiss. Beatrice kissed him back with equal fervor, feeling like her heart might burst from happiness. They were married a month later in a small ceremony at the Fairweather Ranch. Martha helped Beatrice make a simple but beautiful dress of cream-colored cotton, and Maria prepared a feast for the celebration afterward. Mr. Fairweather walked Beatrice down the makeshift aisle, his eyes suspiciously bright as he placed her hand in Preston's. The ceremony was performed by a traveling preacher who happened to be passing through Oatman, and as Beatrice and Preston exchanged their vows in the golden afternoon light, Beatrice felt a sense of peace she had never known before. She was free. She was loved. She was exactly where she was meant to be. After the wedding, Preston and Beatrice moved into a larger cabin on the Fairweather property while they made plans for their future. Mr. Fairweather had offered Preston a partnership in the ranch, impressed by his work ethic and integrity. It was an opportunity Preston had never dared dream of, and he accepted gratefully. Meanwhile, Beatrice began the work of establishing Clara's house. She purchased a small building in Oatman and spent months renovating it, turning it into a safe haven for women in need. She worked with Martha and Maria and several other women in town to create a network of support, ensuring that no woman would be turned away. The first woman came to Clara's house in the spring of 1885. Her name was Ruth, and she was fleeing an abusive husband. Beatrice took her in, gave her a safe place to stay, and helped her find work at the general store. Within months, 3 more women had come seeking help, and Beatrice knew she was doing something important. Preston supported her work completely, even as he built his partnership with Mr. Fairweather. Together, they were creating something beautiful, a life built on love and mutual respect, a family of their own making. In the summer of 1886, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She had never thought much about children during the years with Tobias, had not dared to imagine a future beyond survival. But now, with Preston by her side and a safe home around her, the idea of bringing a child into the world felt like a miracle. Preston was over the moon when she told him. He picked her up and spun her around, just as he had when she agreed to marry him, then immediately set her down gently and apologized for being too rough. Beatrice laughed and pulled him in for a kiss, assuring him that she was not made of glass. Their son was born in February 1887, in the bedroom of their cabin with Maria and Martha in attendance. It was a long labor, and there were moments when Beatrice was convinced she could not do it. But Preston held her hand through it all, never leaving her side, and when the baby finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Beatrice felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. They named him Peter Fairweather Foster, after Preston's middle name and Mr. Fairweather, who had become like a father to them both. Peter was a healthy, happy baby with his father's brown eyes and his mother's dark hair, and from the moment he arrived, he was adored by everyone on the ranch. Life settled into a new rhythm after Peter's birth. Beatrice continued to run Clara's house, though she scaled back her hours to care for the baby. Preston worked the ranch and helped with Peter whenever he could, proving to be a natural and loving father. Watching him with their son, seeing the gentleness and patience he showed, made Beatrice fall in love with him all over again. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter into the world. They named her Clara Marie Foster, after the woman whose death had led to Beatrice's freedom and Maria, who had become like family to them. Clara was a quieter baby than Peter had been, with her mother's green eyes and a serious expression that made everyone laugh. As the years passed, the Fosters' family and legacy grew. Peter and Clara were joined by two more children, both boys, James in 1891 and Thomas in 1894. The cabin became too small for their growing family, so Preston built a proper house on a piece of land adjacent to the Fairweather Ranch, land that Mr. Fairweather sold to him for a fraction of its worth. The house was beautiful, with a wide porch and enough bedrooms for all the children, plus a study where Beatrice could do the bookkeeping for Clara's house. There was a large kitchen where the family gathered for meals, and a living room with a fireplace where Preston would read to the children on cold winter nights. Clara's house flourished as well. Over the years, dozens of women passed through its doors, each one finding safety and support as they rebuilt their lives. Some stayed in Oatman, finding work and starting over in the small mining town. Others moved on to different places, carrying with them the knowledge that they were strong and capable and worthy of better treatment. Beatrice never forgot where she had come from. She never forgot the terror of running from Tobias or the desperation she had felt when she stumbled into Oatman all those years ago. But she also never let that past define her. She had survived, and more than that, she had thrived. She had built a life full of love and purpose, surrounded by people who cared for her not because they had to, but because they chose to. Preston's dreams of owning his own ranch came true when Mr. Fairweather passed away in 1895, leaving the ranch to Preston and Beatrice in his will. Mr. Fairweather had no other family, and he had come to think of the Fosters as his own. His death was a source of great sorrow for them all, but they honored his memory by continuing to run the ranch with the same integrity and fairness he had shown. The Foster Ranch, as it came to be known, became one of the most respected operations in the territory. Preston treated his workers well, paying fair wages and ensuring good conditions. Beatrice kept the books and managed the business side of things, her natural skill with numbers proving invaluable. Together, they built something that would last for generations. As the children grew older, they each found their own paths. Peter showed an aptitude for ranching and worked alongside his father from a young age, learning everything Preston could teach him about horses and cattle and the land. Clara inherited her mother's passion for helping others and spent much of her time at Clara's house, eventually taking over its management when Beatrice decided to step back. James became interested in medicine after the town doctor treated him for a broken arm, and the doctor took him on as an apprentice. Thomas, the youngest, had a gift for music and could often be found playing the guitar on the front porch, filling the evening air with sweet melodies. The years brought their share of challenges, as all lives do. There were droughts that tested the ranch's resources, illnesses that swept through the family, and the normal struggles of raising children and running a business. But through it all, Preston and Beatrice faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. On their 20th wedding anniversary in December 1905, Preston took Beatrice on a trip to California. It was just the two of them, the children old enough now to manage without their parents for a few weeks. Preston had been planning it for months, wanting to give Beatrice the gift she had once mentioned in passing, all those years ago by a campfire. When they reached the coast and Beatrice saw the ocean for the first time, she cried. It was everything the books had promised and more. Vast and powerful and beautiful, endless waves rolling in under a sky that seemed to go on forever. They stood on the beach together, hand in hand, and Beatrice thought about how far she had come from that terrified woman who had stumbled into Oatman more than 20 years earlier. "Thank you," she said to Preston, leaning against him as they watched the sun set over the water. "For everything. For saving me, for loving me, for giving me a life I never thought possible." Preston kissed the top of her head. "You saved yourself," he said. "I just had the good fortune to be there when you needed a hand, and as for the rest, loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done." They stayed on the coast for a week, exploring the beaches and the small towns, enjoying the rare luxury of time alone together. But eventually, they were ready to go home, back to their children and their ranch and the life they had built together. As they traveled back to Arizona, Beatrice reflected on everything that had happened. She thought about Tobias, long since hanged and buried in an unmarked grave. She thought about Clara, whose death had been the catalyst for so much change. She thought about all the women who had come through Clara's house, each one carrying their own stories of survival and courage. But mostly, she thought about Preston, about his steady presence and his unwavering support, about the family they had created together, not through blood alone but through choice and commitment and love, about the way he still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, even after 20 years of marriage. The Fosters returned to the ranch to find everything running smoothly in their absence. Peter had managed things beautifully, and the other children had pitched in to help. There was a welcome home celebration, with all their friends and neighbors gathering to hear about their trip and share in their joy. As Beatrice looked around at the faces of the people she loved, at the home she and Preston had built, at the life they had created together, she felt a sense of gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She had been so broken when she came to Oatman, so convinced that she would never be more than what Tobias had made her, but Preston had seen something else in her. He had seen her strength and her courage. He had seen her potential, and he had loved her enough to help her see it too. Years continued to pass, bringing more grandchildren, more changes, more joys and sorrows. The Arizona Territory became a state in 1912, and the Fosters celebrated along with their neighbors. The world was changing rapidly, with automobiles beginning to replace horses and electricity coming to even small towns like Oatman. But some things remained constant. The love between Preston and Beatrice never wavered. They were partners in every sense of the word, facing the world together as they always had. They grew old together, their hair turning gray, their faces weathering like the desert landscape they loved. Clara's house continued its mission long after Beatrice had stepped back from running it. Their daughter Clara proved to be a worthy successor, expanding the program to offer job training and education alongside the basic shelter and safety. Women came from all over the territory, and later the state, knowing they would find help in Oatman. Peter married a young woman named Elizabeth, and they gave Preston and Beatrice their first grandchildren, twin boys who were the spitting image of their grandfather. James finished his medical training and opened a practice in Prescott, visiting often and keeping the family supplied with medical care. Thomas's musical talent took him on the road for a while, playing in various towns and cities, but he eventually returned to Oatman and settled down with a schoolteacher named Anne. On a warm spring evening in 1920, Preston and Beatrice sat on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the desert. They were both in their 60s now, their bodies showing the wear of hard work and long years. But their hands were still intertwined, and their love was as strong as ever. "Do you ever regret it?" Beatrice asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Taking a chance on a desperate woman in a blood-stained dress. Preston turned to look at her, his brown eyes still warm despite the decades that had passed. Not for a single moment. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Beatrice Foster, you and the life we have built together." "I never thought I would have this," Beatrice said softly. "A family, a home, a purpose. I never thought I deserved it." "Everyone deserves love and safety," Preston said. "You just had to wait a little longer than most to find it." Beatrice leaned her head on Preston's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her. She thought about the girl she had been, running through the night with her brother's rage at her heels. That girl had been so afraid, so certain that her life would never be more than fear and pain. But that girl had been wrong. That girl had been braver than she knew, strong enough to take a chance on hope even when it seemed impossible. And that girl had grown into a woman who had built a legacy of helping others find the same hope and safety she had found. "I love you," Beatrice said, the words as heartfelt now as they had been the first time she said them. "I love you too," Preston replied. "Always have, always will." They sat together as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The desert stretched out around them, ancient and eternal, bearing witness to their love story and the family they had created. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of their grandchildren playing, visiting for the weekend with their parents. There was laughter and music, the clatter of dishes being washed, all the comfortable sounds of family life. It was everything Beatrice had ever wanted and more than she had ever dared to dream. As the evening deepened into night, Preston and Beatrice remained on the porch, content in each other's company. They had traveled a long road together, from that desperate day in Oatman when their paths first crossed to this moment of peace and fulfillment. They had faced dangers and overcome obstacles. They had built a home and raised a family. They had loved each other through everything life threw at them. And as they sat there together, hand in hand, watching the stars wheel overhead in their ancient dance, they knew that whatever time they had left, they would face it the same way they had faced everything else. Together, as partners, as lovers, as the family they had chosen to become. The Wild West that had once seemed so harsh and unforgiving had become home. The cowboy who had caught a falling woman had become so much more than a hero. He had become a husband, a father, a partner in every sense of the word. And the woman who had been running from cruelty had found not just safety, but love, purpose, and a family that was everything she had always deserved. Their story was one of survival and courage, of love conquering fear, of two people finding each other and choosing, every single day, to build something beautiful together. And as the years continued to pass, and their family grew and flourished, that story became part of the fabric of Oatman itself, a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of love, and the possibility of redemption. Preston and Beatrice Foster lived long lives, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren before they passed, within months of each other, in the late 1920s. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their headstones simple but heartfelt, declaring their love for each other and the family they had built. Clara's house continued to operate for decades after, eventually becoming a network of safe houses throughout Arizona and beyond. The Foster Ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations, a testament to Preston's hard work and Beatrice's business acumen. And in Oatman, their story became legend, told and retold as an example of how love and courage can triumph over even the darkest circumstances. The cowboy and the woman he saved had found each other in the Wild West, and together, they had created a legacy of love and hope that would endure long after they were gone. They had proved that family is not always about blood, but about the people who choose to stand beside you, who love you through your worst moments and celebrate your triumphs. They had shown that it is never too late to start over, never too late to find happiness, never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. And in the end, that was the greatest gift they gave to each other and to all who knew them. The knowledge that no matter how dark the past, there is always the possibility of a brighter future if only you are brave enough to reach for it and lucky enough to find someone willing to help you grasp it.